Today I am reviewing the Game Trilogy by Anders De La Motte. The books are Game, Buzz and Bubble. They were originally written in Swedish, but I read the English translations by Neil Smith. These are adult thrillers containing swearing, sex, violence and drug use. I shall try to keep this review spoiler-free. Hi, I'm Tina and I'm addicted to books. I buy bargain books to read and then resell. I bought these books for 99p each. Gosh, must have been feeling rich that day. So the books, written by Anders De La Motte, the chap's Swedish, so I read the English translation by Neil Smith. Overall, I'd say the translation was pretty good. I only noticed a couple of small errors. The writing style took a while to get used to, and I'm not sure if that was because of the translation or just because of the way the author wrote it in the first place. The perspective keeps jumping between the two main characters in a way that tries to trip you up and make you wonder which one you're focusing on. And at one point, I thought the two siblings were actually getting it on. Basically, the premise of these books are that a guy finds a phone, a nice, posh, sleek, new phone, and rather than doing what any normal person would do, which would be hand it in to the police as lost property or ask around and see if anyone's lost it, he takes a liking to it and starts trying to work out how to use it and make the most of it for himself. And while he's doing that, a message comes in asking him if he wants to play a game. All he wanted to do was figure out how the mobile phone in his hand worked and whether it was possible to do anything as simple as make a phone call with it. That's so true of modern phones these days. And that made me chuckle. Most modern phones do anything but make a phone call. Now, okay, the idea of this is quite intriguing. What sort of game? Well, it turns out that the game is asking him to do something a little bit nefarious. Should he do it? Again, any sane person would ignore the message, delete the app if they could, if they wanted to keep the phone, and move on with their lives. But no, he sees it as a challenge and he accepts and he joins the game. He starts doing the challenges and goes deeper and deeper down this wormhole, doing more and more criminal acts in order to satisfy the game and his own ego. As a thriller, it works quite well because there are a lot of things going on. What's he getting himself involved with? What's the overall goal of the game? Who's behind it? So it is quite intriguing in that respect. But at the back of your mind is always the feeling, why is he doing it? Why doesn't he just stop? So I couldn't relate to the main character at all, and I really didn't like him. He was an egotistical chauvinist. The other main character in these books is his sister, who works for the police, and weirdly, she's not likeable either. So I think for me, these books were kind of a bit of a love-hate relationship. I loved the idea of the books, but I didn't really like the way the characters behaved or their personalities. One of the things I did like about the books was the description of the places in Sweden, so the cities and the countryside. It really made you feel like you were there and you can appreciate the landscape. And it's quite refreshing to read a thriller that's not set in London or New York. As I read these books, I made a few notes, so I'll go through those with you. Page 79, which actually I'm going to have to completely blur, because this is YouTube and YouTube's PG and this is definitely not PG. So this confirmed my opinion of the main character and I thought, whoa, where did that come from? A full-blown sex scene, totally unwarranted, totally unneeded, and let's just skip quickly past that, shall we? Especially when it tried to make you think that he was doing it with his sister because of the way it was written. It wasn't his sister, by the way. And then at the end, I've given my thoughts about the book, and I'm going to have to skip most of it because I don't want to give away too many spoilers. So the book ended with a few cliffhangers. Well, not really. So the book ended with a few things unresolved that you guess may be addressed in the following books. And I said at the end of this one that hopefully HP, the main character, wouldn't be involved in the next books because I really didn't like him much and I wasn't invested in him. So slight spoiler alert, he's in all 3 books. So at the end of this book I gave it 3 stars. Overall I enjoyed it and I did continue with reading the next one in the series. But I just hoped that the characters would be different or at least improved or developed. It was pretty fast-paced, especially towards the end. Some of the twists you could see coming, but there were a few surprises as well. So overall, would I recommend this book? Yes, I think I would. If you've got plenty of time to read and you just want something a bit light and easy. So the second book in the series. It's called Buzz. Again, I read the English translation. It's not as good as the first one. The pace dipped considerably. The ideas and concepts were good, but it's not as gripping as the first one. The characters, HP, became more likeable as he sobered up, but his sister Becca became less so. But there was a bit of character development in this one. But I still wasn't really impressed with either of them, although obviously decided to finish the trilogy at the end, just to wrap things up. So on page 39, the only truth is that everyone is lying. That made me think of Assassin's Creed, the Assassin's Creed motto, which made me chuckle. And then on page 184, there was another thing that reminded me of Assassin's Creed, I think. Where is it? Here it is. None of the old truths apply anymore. Everything can be questioned, changed or rejected. The rules of the game have changed forever, and anyone who doesn't realise this is doomed to fall. That made me think of Assassin's Creed as well. On page 225. He who controls the past controls the future. George Orwell. Yeah, one of my favourite quotations too. On page 226. You've probably heard of the Streisand effect, where your efforts to conceal information only serve to increase the attention being paid to it. On page 257. I thought, HP is becoming a bit more likeable, maybe because he's sobered up. Becca becoming less so. The pace of this one's dipped considerably, especially compared to the last book. I like the idea and the concepts, but it isn't as gripping as the first book yet. There wasn't a great deal left for it to then get gripping, to be honest, but it did, it picked up a little bit. On page 310. Which I might have to blur looking at what's written up there. He blew on his tea, but had to put the cup down so as not to burn his fingers. Cups without handles, no doubt very feng shui, but not really very practical if you weren't a bit of a masochist. That made me laugh. That's down here. So I can blur the top of the page because there's some very rude words. I have to say, throughout this book, there is a lot of swearing. On page 345... Christmas Day, it says it is. And then he says he got himself a cheeseburger. Really? Burger King's open on Christmas Day in America? That's really surprised me. In the UK, they're not. It'd be quite funny if they were. You could have a burger for Christmas dinner. I suppose it isn't the States, though, is it? This is set in Sweden, sorry, so maybe Sweden's different. Maybe all sorts of places are open on Christmas Day in Sweden. I have no idea. And on page 381, I had a laugh out loud moment, which is quite unusual for me. I'm normally quite restrained when reading, unless it's Terry Pratchett, of course. This one said, try and find where it is. He had about as much chance of surviving intact as a girl with big bosoms in a horror movie, but he still had to give it his best shot because those couldn't be allowed to get away with this. That made me laugh. So this second book in the series I gave 3 stars. It's not as good as the first one. I paced it considerably. Ideas, concepts are good, but not as gripping. So I'm going to finish the trilogy, but I'm really not invested in the people. I think if you're a slow reader or you don't get much time to read, you wouldn't want to pick up these books because they wouldn't have thought you'd feel that they were worth the time invested. There's probably lots of other books out there that are better. But if you've got the time and you like the idea of a guy being caught up in a game on his mobile phone, then maybe you should pick him up and give him a go. So, book 3, Bubble. Just trying to find my notes. On page 234, about halfway through the book, not enjoying this one as much, feels like the author didn't have as many ideas and is stringing it out to eke out a third book. It all seems unnecessarily complicated at the moment, and although HP, the main character, felt as if he was developing in the last book, in this one he's backslid to an even more obnoxious person than the first one, and his sister isn't far behind. I'm going to finish it just to complete the story and hope for a satisfactory ending, whatever that may be. On page 345, that was the trouble with conspiracy theories. Once you started to accept their existence, it was impossible to say where they really stopped. Just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they aren't after you. I quite like that. At the end of this book, I gave it 3 stars. I'm glad that I've completed the series, and overall I enjoyed this book, but it felt very forced. It's as if the author didn't have enough material for a third book, but wrote it anyway. The pacing's all over the place. The main characters that were starting to develop in the second book crashed back down, becoming even more unlikable than in the first one. I really wasn't rooting for them or invested in them, and I didn't care what happened to them in the end, so the ending was almost a shame. It could have been a lot stronger. Still, at least everything had a conclusion or explanation, if you hadn't already worked most of it out. Now that I've finished the trilogy, I'm thinking, great idea, poorly implemented. So, in summary, I read them quite quickly. I wouldn't read them again. I would recommend them if you've got time on your hands and you like thrillers, but if you're kind of on the fence on thrillers, then this is not the best one for you to read. The characters, a bit shallow, not really likeable, I wasn't invested in them at all and didn't really care what happened to them, so it made it difficult to keep reading in that respect. The concept, as I say, of finding this mobile phone and then being invited to take part in a game that gets increasingly more dangerous and illegal is quite an intriguing one, but I'm not sure what kind of people would actually really take part in something like that, so it was almost unbelievable at a point. In summary, I gave them all 3 stars. So I read them, they were enjoyable enough, but I won't be reading them again. I'm selling them, and I probably won't be picking up any more by this author for my own personal read. But if you're into thrillers, you might get something out of it and you might really enjoy it. If you've read them, let me know what you thought. If you've read them in Swedish, maybe they're better than they are in English. Anyway, don't think I can say much more about them really, so I'll leave it there and go and read a different book.